This presentation is obviously about women in the early republic, and it partners with the next video about women in the, wait for it, later republic. If you're hoping for a quick route through this, I'm afraid there isn't one, so you have to take your notes as you go, pause the video as and when required, and off we go. For all of the achievements, or all the rights and the privileges that certain women might have had in the early republic, we have to remember that a woman was always under the guardianship of a man, to begin with her father and then later her husband, a paterfamilias, the head of the family. Over time the position improved, but by and large for the majority of Roman women, they spent most of their life under the guardianship of a man. A father could make a choice as to whether he would raise a newborn child or not. Those of you who have looked at Greece will be familiar with the concept of exposure, how a family could abandon an unwanted child. And a child might be unwanted for a number of reasons. It might have some form of disability, it might have some form of impediment, but sometimes children were exposed because they were not the right gender. This was a patriarchal society. Families wanted sons. However, especially in the early republic, because infant mortality was so high, there wasn't an awful lot of exposure of unwanted girls. It did happen, but it wasn't enormously widespread because families needed children, full stop. But it did happen. So if a family already had a number of daughters, they may choose to expose another daughter that was born. By law in the Republic, all healthy male children had to be reared, but only the first daughter had to be reared. After that, the family had choices. Generally speaking, girls took the feminine form of their father's name. So Julius Caesar would have had a daughter called Julia, and they would be differentiated by either numbers or nicknames. Julia 1, Julia 2, I mean literally, or nicknames as we have today. Girls were educated for marriage. They were trained for marriage. They were child-producing, household-running machines. That was effectively their status. A girl could be betrothed to be married as young as 12. It would be unlikely that a marriage would occur then. The marriage might come later, but the arrangement for the marriage could happen pretty early in a girl's life. Some girls went to school. Absolutely by no means not all. And usually just to a fairly basic sort of a level, basic reading and writing, arithmetic, the skills that would help her in the running of a household, or at a push a household and a shop maybe. But it was more important for the girls to have the household skills of weaving and domestic duties. A girl's childhood was ended ceremonially the night before her marriage, and the night before the marriage she would visit the Lararium, the shrine of the household gods, and she would place her toys on the shrine of the household gods, and symbolically that ends her childhood, and the following day she gets married. All Roman marriages are arranged marriages unless you read different. On some level they were all arranged. In the lower classes they were arranged in a way that would benefit both parties through family alliances, the same as at the upper end of society. Family alliances would benefit two families. A father would choose his daughter's husband, but don't Don't be fooled into thinking this was an entirely father-driven project. Mothers were consulted, and on occasion daughters, the girls themselves were consulted. However, the decision regarding the marriage lay with the paterfamilias. The things which were important in these marriages in the upper classes, for example, were wealth, social position, and the potential of a potential husband. What kind of life can be offered here, and how can this benefit the family? If a girl really took against the man to whom she was betrothed, it was a rare thing that the marriage was forced upon her. Again, it did happen, but by and large, if a girl had a real issue with the marriage, she would reject it, and an alternative would be found. But there were some rules. Some kind of marriages were banned. For example, any girl from a senatorial family was disallowed from marrying a freedman, a man who had been a slave. And Roman citizens could not marry slaves, full stop. A sponsalia, an engagement ceremony, would be held when a marriage was agreed, even if the girl was still a child. And agreements between families, once they were made, were symbolized through the girl being given an iron ring. I've come across some sources, not some secondary sources, that suggested that the ring was a symbol of a chain, and that it was an indication that the girl was being traded like a slave. And this is just nonsense. An iron ring in Rome's past, iron was a very valuable metal, and an iron ring would have been a valuable ring. Simple as that. We say that, well, the slide says that marriage would take place when a girl was about 14, and that was the case. But obviously there were marriages later, and especially second and third and fourth marriages, if a husband died or if the couple divorced or so on. But girls were expected to marry young. There are 3 forms of marriage called manus marriages. These are where the father gives the manus, the hand of the daughter, to the husband. You really do need to remember these 3 as well. Manus marriages meant that the bride severed all legal connection with her original family, and she became part of her husband's family. So yes, it's a very symbolic moment. Marriage always is, but in this case it's symbolic in the sense of severing a tie, rather than what we tend to associate with it, a tie being formed. So 3 types of manus marriages. The first one is coemptio, where in a traditional ceremony the groom pretended to buy the girl from her father. Usus is a very simple kind of marriage. The couple lived together for a year, and then the father would give the hand of his daughter. And the third type, which is the most formal type, the type that was used most commonly by Rome's patrician class, the confariatio. And for this there were elaborate ceremonies. First of all, there had to be a number of ceremonies carried out to ensure that the chosen day for the marriage was a lucky day, an auspicious day. So auspices would be carried out. The entrails of birds would be read. The bride would dress in white. She would wear an orange veil. The sacrifice was conducted in the presence of the Pontifex Maximus, literally the head of the Roman religion, and the high priest of Jupiter had to be there, along with 10 witnesses. It's a big deal. It's a prestige wedding in the Roman calendar. And if that part of it seems very high blown and unusual to us, a ritual cake was shared by the couple. Now, I don't know if our tradition of having a wedding cake comes from this particular source, but it at least establishes a link between our culture and ancient Rome. sharing a cake on your wedding day, it does seem quite a human sort of thing to do. The hands of the bride-to-be and the husband-to-be were joined by a matron of honour. More information on the matron of honour shortly. And the bride would say, "Where you are Gaius, I am Gaia." And it means that she has joined her husband's family. They share the same name. She has the feminine form of her husband's name. A marriage contract was signed, and in the contract it would note the bride's dowry, how much money she brought to the marriage. Dowries are a complication that we might come to later on. This contract was then signed. It is a legal document. A feast would follow, and then after the feast there would be a torchlit procession to the husband's house, and along the way revelers would sing songs to Hymen, the god of marriage. I don't know if you've seen The Godfather, but in the scenes in Sicily when Michael Corleone marries Apollonia, there is a procession from the church to the marriage house, and I do wonder aloud if this is an overhang from ancient Rome into Roman Catholicism and into the traditions of Sicily. I'm rambling. A dowry is a payment. It is a sum of money that the bride takes to her new home. And in a manus marriage, remember there are 3 types of manus marriage, it became the husband's property. However, if the couple divorce, the husband was expected to return the dowry. And if it's a bitter divorce, or if there are complications in the marriage, recovering the dowry became quite tricky for the bride. And the dowry is important because she needs it if she is to marry another man. So the dowry becomes an important aspect of a marriage, but also I guess it is a way of forcing the couple to persist through difficulties. If the husband is thinking this marriage isn't going very well for me at the moment, I might get a divorce, he might be forced to think twice. If he also has to think, right, I need to recover the thousands of sesterces that my bride brought with her dowry. However, by the 3rd century BCE, as the slide will tell you, people started to see the benefit of free marriages. These are marriages without manus, marriages where the hand is not given from the father of the bride to the husband. In a free marriage, a wife would legally remain a member of her father's family. Her property, her dowry remained her own, although it would have been controlled by her father, or if the father was dead, it would be in the hands of her guardian, an uncle or an elder relative usually. And in a free marriage, she could also receive inheritances from her family. And people started to see this non-severance of the ties between the bride and her original family as a real plus. But the lives of women were tricky in a number of ways. A woman couldn't make a will, she couldn't make a legal contract, she couldn't sell property, she couldn't free slaves, she couldn't prosecute a lawsuit unless a father or guardian or husband was to do it for her. If she was left as a widow, if her husband died, a guardian, a tutor, would be appointed, usually her brother or even her son, to conduct her legal affairs. So she, even in those circumstances when her husband dies, she is not allowed to be legally responsible for herself. As time went on, women started to find ways to get around these laws. And although women were usually subject to the legal authority and supervision of a male guardian, as the period goes on, women start to lead increasingly independent lives. They find loopholes so that they can manage property, and other loopholes so that they can have legal, they can conduct their legal affairs, their legal matters, without a guardian. Divorce in ancient Rome has been legal, had been legal, was legal since the early days of the Republic. In 451 BCE, it's recorded law. A husband just needs to say, take your things and go. The wife gives up her keys to the household. Congratulations, you're divorced. Under Manus marriages, a husband could divorce his wife, but the wife could not divorce the husband. One ancient writer claimed that no divorce at all was possible after a confariatio marriage. Under free marriage, on the other hand, divorce was easy peasy. We have the same symbolic aspects as in a manus divorce. The husband says, take your things and go. The wife surrenders her household keys. That's the end of the marriage. But unlike manus marriages and manus divorces, am I inventing terms as we go along? We'll go with manus divorces then. Under a free divorce or free marriage divorce, the wife or her father who was acting on her behalf, or her guardian acting on her behalf, could divorce her husband as easily as the husband can divorce his wife. If the wife had been unfaithful, the husband kept some of the dowry, so that they divorced. He kept some of the money and she kept some of the money, and that was the divorce. However, if a husband had been unfaithful, the wife had absolutely no recourse in the eyes of the law. That was it. And children of divorced parents always stayed in the custody of the father. The ideal Roman woman is in many ways an archetype which has endured, especially in Italian culture. The matrona, the matron, like the patronos. The matrona is a faithful wife, a faithful mother. She is the female head of the family. She looks after the household. This is her domain. She looked after her children, supervised the running of the household. She allowed her husband freedom to focus on service to the state. So while she was looking after domestic affairs in the household, looking after slaves, organizing all matters to do with the family, her husband could go and attend Senate meetings or assembly meetings. In this way, a Roman woman had a position of status in that she allowed her husband a full political career. Women who married only once were very highly esteemed, and in times of crisis, prayers from these women was very highly valued. And only a woman who had been married, let me retry that, a woman who had been married only once, only such a woman could be the matron of honor at a formal marriage ceremony. If that seems like a very limited sort of life, then much as in ancient Greece, where women were essentially domestic people, there were outlets for women through religion. Women in Rome were responsible for festivals connected with fertility and motherhood. Some priestesses were devoted to personified ideas, deified ideas. So chastity was considered to be a goddess, to be worshipped, and priestesses did worship this concept. And as mentioned, the prayers from chaste married women and virgins were considered to be especially effective if the state of Rome was in a time of crisis, or if they felt that the gods were somehow unhappy with some decision or some event. Some of you will be familiar with the Vestal Virgins from last year, National 5. The Vestal Virgins were a group of priestesses, 6 of them, and they guarded the eternal flame, the flame which burned in the temple of Vesta in the Forum in Rome. It was believed that if this flame ever went out, disaster would befall Rome. The Vestal Virgins lived in the house of the Vestals, which was beside the temple of Vesta in the Forum. And girls became Vestal Virgins between the ages of 6 and 10, and they served as Vestal priestesses, Vestal Virgins, for 30 years. This is a huge allocation of a girl's lifespan. They were sworn to chastity, but after they had completed their service as a Vestal Virgin, they could marry then. But few did. The Vestals had a good degree of status and respect in Rome. To become a Vestal priestess, a girl had to be free from physical defects and to be the daughters of freeborn living parents. So notice the difference between freeborn and freedman. Freeborn means that you are born to parents who themselves were free. Freedman means that you started as a slave and you were freed. So you had to be born to parents who were already free. Daughters of freedmen did later become eligible, but for this presentation, this period, the early republic, you had to be born of freeborn parents. They had a number of privileges. They had special seats reserved for them at public events. They could make wills. They could own and sell and dispose property. So these are real benefits to women serving as Vestal Virgins. However, there are a couple of punishments which might make you think twice about this group of priestesses. If the sacred flame ever went out, the Vestal responsible for the flame or responsible for it going out was flogged. They were whipped. And if a Vestal had been found guilty of unchastity, if she had sex with somebody during her 30 years service to the temple of Vesta, she was buried alive and her lover would be executed. It's a bit grim, really, isn't it? We have to have a bit of perspective when we look at the lives of ancient Roman women. We always must have in mind that the overwhelming, huge majority of our sources are written by men. And ancient Roman men have a particular view of what Roman women are, what Roman women should be, and what are the expected standards of behavior. So we take a lot of the sources about women with a pinch of salt because we don't have many female voices reaching through the ages to us. There are many inscriptions, though, on tombstones that were erected by wives to their dead husbands. And a lot of these tombstones have been put up by a wife when her husband has died, and they speak really fondly, really affectionately, and they speak about having a long and happy life with their husband. So we have to kind of balance these two. On the one hand, the sources are not reliable because they're mostly written by men, but on the other hand, we have these inscriptions which suggest that a lot of Roman women did enjoy being married, or at least found happiness in their marriage. And somewhere between the two is probably the truth. As usual, any questions, see me in class.